It's 8:34. So, oh, meeting is being recorded. Yes, got it. Yeah, right. Okay, so well, greetings, everybody. Glad to get a chance to talk with you all this morning. And so when I was preparing this program, a certain amount of anxiety, and I was like, oh, is this just universalism one more time? Am I always just, stitching together science and some pieces of religion and stuff like that? And people are getting tired of hearing about that. It's just, musing about this. But it reminded me of a story that a priest I knew back at UCLA said that he had a homiletics professor who, I guess the students were expressing that kind of anxiety. Is it novel? Is it original? Is it, And he said, you only give one homily. Homily is what Catholics call what everybody else calls a sermon. And so I thought that was kind of nice to take the pressure off these young, striving students, But the thing is, though, the priest I'm talking about was really a bright, creative guy. He was not just rehashing the same thing every Sunday, that's for sure. But the thing is, I think there is a certain truth in that, okay, exploring same old ground in a different way. Because think about it. Well, here's a pretty good one. Reform your lives. The kingdom of God is at hand. That's a pretty good one, and you could talk about that for a couple thousand years and not figure out what it actually means. There are those who would say that phrase means stop sinning or God's going to send you to hell. And there are people, maybe some of the same people, who think it means that the kingdom of God is at hand means Jesus is going to pop out of hiding any day now and hit the reset button on the world and make everything all right. Now, obviously, by the way, I just caricatured those two views. They're not mine. But the thing is, I prefer a version of that that's reform your lives. The kingdom of God is at hand. How about if it's reshape your lives? The kingdom of God is in our hands. Paradise is ours for the making, right? So I like that version, but I realize there's a lot of other people who like other versions. And so that's kind of what I hope we're here for, is to be able to appreciate each other's point of view about what this whole religious enterprise is all about. Why are we coming together? What is it all for? And so that's why I like to really emphasize the D in the ADG, the discussion part. So, I have a lot of material here to talk about, and I like to talk, but I hope I don't fall. I hope I don't fall in love with the sound of my own voice too much. Really, the goal is to have a conversation and to bring up provocative topics that will get us thinking and talking to each other about our different ways of thinking about these questions and what it all means to us. So, and one nice thing about the fact that I've got 3 weeks in a row, poor you guys. No, one of the good things about that, though, is I don't have to worry about an agenda, like there's a bunch of stuff I've got to get through. I've got a bunch of source material here, and hopefully that'll be fertile ground and it'll lead to interesting conversations. But we don't have to get to a fixed endpoint. It's just because the point is for us to come to a greater understanding of ourselves and each other. And that's to take nothing away from the parts of ADG that are, esteemed experts coming in and enlightening us. That's all good. I spent way too much of my life in school. I like that kind of stuff. And so, if it can make us, it can just satisfy our intellectual curiosity, or if it can make us more informed about social issues and, decisions that we need to make as informed citizens, that's all great, or social action we can do as a church. But I think there is a necessary place for us to just share our own, to share ourselves, as well as to, gain wisdom from the exalted ones, right? So, so that's kind of why I take this slightly different angle on this. So really, please butt in and ask questions, and go ahead, Frank. Oh, wait, we need, yeah.
So in that spirit, can you begin by giving us your definition of spirituality?
Probably not. Well, I guess the thing is, it got turned upside down by this book, in a way. There's a book, I'm sorry, I'll get to that in just a second. Yeah, so there's a book that kind of inspired this particular excursion I'm doing, not the entire book, but a certain insight that I got from this book that really caused me to yeah, so that's where I'm heading. That's where I'm heading next. And yeah, so that what do we mean by spirituality is kind of the purpose of this whole exercise, actually. That's what it's going to wind up being, is what is that? What is it now? What was it 10,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago? And what is real spirituality? And that's so yeah, that's actually where we're going with all of this. And this reminds me a little bit, one more little preamble. It reminds me a little bit of a story about a zealous young student who got to meet his idol, the teacher, and he was going to get to study with this guy. I think this is from it's probably a Buddhist story. It might be Taoist, but I think it's Buddhist. But so he's going to get to meet the teacher at long last, and this is going to be great. So he is so excited. You know, imagine, if you will, a 13-year-old girl meeting the Beatles in 1966, right? Or whatever, you know, whatever generation you happen to be, you know. And so he is so excited. He gets to meet this esteemed leader at long last. So he meets him, and he's profusely praising him, and you know, he's learned so much about him, and he's so anxious to learn more about him, and he's talking and talking and talking like somebody else you might know. And the teacher finally gets a word in edgewise and said, "Have you had your tea?" And the student says, "No." "Well, let's have tea." "Okay." And so the teacher is preparing the tea while the student is talking, very excited, so happy, so excited. And so the teacher begins to pour the tea. And the tea, and he's, you know, looking at the student who's talking. The tea gets to the top of the cup. It spills over the top of the cup, and he keeps pouring, and it spills over the saucer and onto the tray, and then it spills off of the tray onto the table and onto the floor. Finally, the student says, "Master, it's too much, it's too much." And the master stops pouring and says, "If the cup is already full, we can add nothing. Begin by emptying your cup." And I just love that story. Maybe identify a lot with this over-striving little kid who's got to prove himself. It's kind of funny for somebody at my age. I'm over 60, and I'm still that little kid inside somehow. The little brother, you know, trying to keep up, trying to prove himself. But the thing is that we have to be willing to let go. We have to be willing to make space for a new idea. And if we think we know exactly what religion is or exactly what spirituality is, then we can't let another option in, maybe. And that was this insight kind of, it didn't just empty the cup, it kind of smashed the cup. It was really a kind of a jolt for me, because I mean, I'm a grown-up. I know how to get along in the world. I know what I need to know. But the thing is, there are some people who take that idea of what it means to be a grown-up and self-sufficient, and I know what I need to know, to say, I know everything that is important to me. If I don't know it, it's not important. And that's, some people call that confidence, and I call it the death of intellect and discovery. But that's the kind of feeling I had with what I learned in this book, in this particular passage from this book. So what is this book I've been talking about? Okay, whoops. Well, this is it. It's God, A Human History by Reza Aslan. And so it looks at, I mean, every religious tradition has an origin myth, a story about, you know, the world began and then we began, and or we made the world begin, or whatever it is, right? But what this does is just say, well, let's look at human history and all of what we can detect or infer, or the spiritual impulses and the expressions of that. And so this stuff goes way back. I mean, there's little labels for periods of time, okay? Lower Paleolithic, 2.5 million years to 200,000 years ago. That's somewhere in that time frame is when Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa. The Middle Paleolithic is 200,000 to 40,000 years ago. And the latter part of that time is when the earliest cave paintings showed up, kind of like the little handprints on the cover there, right? Upper Paleolithic is 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. And that's a period of time when there was this flourishing of ritualistic behavior, and that we can actually find evidence of in the archaeological digs, right? So now I had seen, you know, lots of pictures like this of these cave paintings. This particular one, the Cueva de las Manos. Oh, there's a good title, right? Cave of the Hands. It's in Argentina. It's more than 13,000 years old. And the author says that there are these kinds of caves where there are these hand images and stuff like that that are both positive and negative. One, the positive is you put your hand in the pigment and stick it on the wall. The other is you have this pigment in your mouth and you blow it through a bone or something like that, and it sprays, and that's how you make the shadow hand. And people figured this out like 40,000 years ago. I mean, the oldest of these, I think the author was saying, let me see. I think he said something like 40,000 years ago. And so okay, well, that's interesting. And it seems like there's some kind of ritual activity. This doesn't look like, you know, how to kill the next buffalo to have dinner, you know, so there's something interesting going on here, but we don't really know exactly what it is. And you know, what was it for and how many people were involved? Oh yeah, I wanted to read a little passage from here. Aslan writes, what most scholars agree upon is that the religious impulse reaches deep into our Paleolithic past, but just how deep remains a matter of fierce debate. And so, you know, what other evidence is there in different times? Well, we Homo sapiens didn't start it. It started before that. This is in fact, there's one of those 40-something thousand year old caves with that kind of the hand art that dates, it's in France and it's 43,000 years old or something like that. That apparently is before Homo sapiens got there. So some of those handprints are not Homo sapien handprints, they're Neanderthal handprints. And then here's another thing that caves, because caves are where stuff like this survives, I guess, right? So this is, oh yes, here it is. I have my little notes here. Yeah, so Malaga, Spain, carbon dated cave paintings. Oh, it's not the handprints. It's a different kind of cave painting. But in Malaga, Spain, they're dated to 42,300 years ago. So that's pretty cool. Now this is in France, Aveyron Valley, an altar of concentric rings of stalagmite pieces. They refer to it as a sort of a Paleolithic Stonehenge, right? So there's these concentric circles. Now there may be other stalagmites that formed since, you know, but this structure is carbon dated at greater than 176,000 years ago. So clearly Neanderthal, right? It goes back that far. Now, I'm still trying to make some sense of this. So these little the stalagmites, towers, for want of a better word, the small ones, were arranged in circles Right. Yeah. So so you see the stalactites, the ones that come down from above, the C for ceiling, stalagmite, G for ground, right? So stalactite, stalagmite, that just happens because of these minerals that are percolating through the rocks, and they come down to a point, kind of like the way an icicle forms with water. And so that's how the stalactite forms. And then as the drips come off, they make a stalagmite on the ground, right? So that happens naturally. That happens naturally, not by man. But what humans did 176,000 years ago is they took this material and they built something out of it. They built these concentric rings out of it. And so it's like, well, why did they do that? Why would you go into a cave and make these ring structures? So it's, you got nothing else to do? Feed yourself, stay alive, Yeah, so the thing is that this clearly looks like some kind of ritual behavior, and obviously the people who spend their whole lives studying it know a lot more about it than I do. But the thing is, so they're saying this is some kind of ritual site. How much can we guess about, like, okay, how large a community was this, and who was involved and what were they doing? It's kind of mysterious, but it goes way back. Well, now, okay, so we're now back to the Neanderthals. Okay, well, there's a site in China that he talks about where there's indications of ritual burial. So some kind of ritualistic behavior that was going on 500,000 years ago. That's not Neanderthals, that's Homo erectus. That's way back. So this is very deep roots in our evolutionary history. It's not something we invented 5,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or whatever. So I think that's, to me, is kind of intriguing, and it's humbling, right? To realize how deep this is, that the religious impulse may be as primal as our musicality. I mean, we are musical beings, but so are dogs and birds and all kinds of things. I mean, it's and here's my my little language is probably built out of our intrinsic musical ability as a species. And maybe what we think of as religion, what I want to think of as religion, which is, how ought we to live our lives, it's built on top of this ground of spirituality. But it's not what the spirituality was invented for. It's not what it evolved for. It had its own reasons for being and its own modes of operation. Yeah. Oh, can you grab the mic so people online will hear?
But to me, so far, you haven't shown where spirituality has come into these things.
Oh, right. Yeah, because as Aslan says, beliefs do not fossilize, right? So we layer our interpretations. We try to intuit something about it, but yeah, but it.
Are you going to be showing other proofs?
Oh, very soon. Yeah, very soon we're going to get to because none of this is the earthquake. None of this, shattered my teacup. I mean, this isn't what, because it's like, oh, okay, fine. All this stuff happened, and then real religion came along later. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
I obviously haven't read the book, but
yeah,
I always find it interesting that, historians try and study material like this.
Yeah.
And I try and project or think, well, if they can try and make sense out of this, where there's obviously very little information other than the archaeological, let's say.
It exists.
And these aren't teacups or bowls or spoons or tools or, if it's something tool-like, you could sort of say, oh, yes, they were using implements.
Purpose was.
This I find challenging in the sense that if one were to take satellite pictures of geographic areas of the world today, and for example, if you're over the Midwest, it's like, wow, there's this very regular rectangular pattern in the landscape. What was that about?
Right, and it's about irrigation, yeah.
Were they master chess players? Were they, building a monument to geometry, or were they just farming?
Yeah. Yes.
So why this was done, and
Right.
claiming that it's ritualistic, which would be like a repetitive thing, or do you mean it just has some deeper meaning to the people who did it?
Right. Yeah. Well, it doesn't look like food, clothing, and shelter.
Well, they may have been counting the days, the sun up, sun down. That could be a possible explanation.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So that, yeah. And of course, when we're talking about, ritual burials, okay, so there's some sort of reverence for the dead, but what does that mean about beliefs? It's a little hard to say for sure. But
into that, we don't, without physical proof of what it means, it's our interpretation of what we're looking at.
Right. Yeah. To what degree are we projecting our worldview onto the artifacts that we're seeing? So that's the challenge, right? It gets a little bit more vivid though in this next piece. So there's inklings back to 500,000 years ago and 176,000 years ago and 40,000 years ago, but it gets much more vivid, obviously 5,000 years ago, but much sooner than that. That's the thing that's really shocking. But now what the author says is early humans maintained certain beliefs about the universe and their place in it long before they began engraving them on the walls of their caves. So yeah, there could have been beliefs, there could have been stuff going on when this happened or when the hand paintings happened, but we don't know exactly what it is. So here's the okay. So here's the thing that was a shock for me or an awakening for me. Aslan writes that okay, there's this site in called Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, just north of the Syrian border, and about more than 12,000 years ago, here's what it looked like when they were building it, as far as we can guess, based on the archaeological evidence of what's still there, right? Aslan says that the site contains the remains of what is widely recognized to be the earliest religious temple ever constructed. Now, I'm with Frank, the spirit of what Frank was saying before. I would have much preferred to say the oldest religious temple yet discovered. Ever constructed? How do we know? We haven't. Apparently it's the oldest one that's ever been discovered yet. So this one really is a big deal because of the date. It's more than 12,000 years ago, right? So. Oh yeah, no. I'll zoom in a little bit more here. Yeah, but first, just put it in the time frame. This is 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the first Egyptian pyramids. Here's the shocker. It's before agriculture. It's before agriculture. That for me is the earthquake, because I thought that first came agriculture. And when agriculture got big enough, then we had civilizations where we had more than a few dozen people getting together. And if you're only in a community of a few dozen people, well, you know everybody. You don't really need lots of laws and stuff like that. I mean, you know everybody personally. But once you've got hundreds or thousands of people, well, then you've got this problem of strangers. And imagine trying to drive if there were no laws and you didn't know whether somebody was going to go to the right or the left every time you met on the streets, or who was going to stop where, or you're going to yield to pedestrians or run them over or what. I mean, no. But I'm just saying, imagine if every time you meet another human, you have to go identification, friend or foe. Are you nice, or are you going to try to kill me? Are you fat and happy, or are you starving and you're going to kill me to survive, or who knows what? Well, you can't live like that if you're constantly doing, identification, friend or foe, friend or foe, friend or foe. One worries that we're getting into that state now politically, but so one of the things we need in a culture is to have some common shared value system. That's how I thought religion as we know it happened. It was a necessity of civilization that we've got to find ways to get along with each other. So therefore we created, and yeah, there might have been this mythological past and stuff like that, but we invented it because we came together, because we're a civilization, we now need religion and ethics and stuff like that. That the chronology is wrong. This stuff was happening when these people were hunter-gatherers, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers who were wearing animal skins, and they had not tilled the soil. They had not done any of that stuff. And yet they built this. Wow. And as far as how do we know in this case that it is definitely a ritual thing? Let me go. Okay, so these pillars here, we're going to zoom in on them in a second, but they are those big tall pillars. They are stylized humans. You can see as you zoom in here on the vertical part of the post, you can see that there are arms engraved on the side, and the hands come together just above the belt or the loincloth. So now the thing is, but the heads are not articulated. They don't have an eye, they don't have eyes, nose, mouth, any of that stuff. They are deliberately abstract. No, how do we know they're deliberately abstract? Well, there at this same site, there are carvings of jaguars, or what is it? Jaguars in that part of the world? What kind of cat was it? Leopards. I'm sorry, leopards. Carvings show the artist could render in exquisite detail. You could see the ribs of these animals, right? That's how good they were at carving and at rendering this artwork. So it wasn't for lack of skill that they had these monoliths, which had human arms and hands and stuff, but then no face. So their interpretation is that this was intentionally abstract. This was not a statue of a human being. This was a statue of a humanized God. And so this is are these generic gods in this little circle here? Well, there's a pretty big circle. Or is it a pantheon? Well, we don't know for sure. There are glyphs on these posts, but no, we don't have a Rosetta Stone. We don't have a way of decoding them. So we don't know if these are the names of the gods or their characteristics or whatever. But the thing is that what archaeologists find is that the participants here, given the population density that prevailed at the time, the participants here would have had to come together from as much as 100 miles away to participate here, to get enough people to actually build this thing, right? Imagine traveling 100 miles on foot to go to church. I don't think they did it every Sunday. But also what the author says is that they would have worshiped different gods. And yet they could come together in this shared space around these shared symbols, these sort of, maybe some sort of archetypal representation of divinity, and it's humanized. But the thing is, well, why is it humanized? Well, really, given evolution and the way our brains work, they had no choice. It was the obvious logical choice. It's the way to explain anything at that stage in human evolution. Humans are the most complicated thing that humans can understand, right? I mean, think about like theory of mind. Oh, well, you know that, and I know that, but you don't know that I know that. And so the fact that you don't know I know means I can take advantage of you. Think about how complicated that is. And yet we play cards or whatever, negotiate all the time. So this is a really hard thing. Really, in some computational sense, that's much harder than computing the square root of 7 to 12-digit accuracy, which any junky little calculator can do in a fraction of a second. I can't do that in a fraction of a second. So our brains are adapted to certain tasks. We're good at certain kinds of things. And therefore, it is natural that, if your only tool is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Well, if your best tool is a thing that understands persons, then you make everything a person. The forces of nature, you've got Pele for the volcano who's erupting right now, or you've got Poseidon, or you've got all these different personified forces of nature, these lofty beings. There's lots of different variations on this. But the thing is that it's just natural that, of course, we would use humans as the model. We are the most complicated thing we see in the world. And so if we're trying to explain some other complicated thing in the world, then we use personification as an intrinsic part of that process. And so we project our human characteristics, even our souls maybe, into non-human things. And it wasn't a decision that they made at that point in time. It was just the default mode of operation. Now, the thing I want to explore potentially in like future weeks here is, well, let's look critically at personification and say, well, when is it the right move? When is it maybe not the best move? We've got other tools at our disposal that our ancestors 12,000 years ago or 14,000 years ago didn't have. And so can we think a little more critically about that and where it works and where it doesn't work? Hey, I've been blasting away here. Does anybody want to share? I should make more space for that. Folks online, anybody want to add anything? Yeah, here, well, let's get a mic. Yeah, thanks.
No, I don't need a mic.
Well, no, the people online will not hear you if you don't talk into the mic.
I've got a question.
That's why I'm talking to a mic. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room can hear me.
Well, you mentioned to let go.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, okay?
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot of times people cannot let go,
Right,
okay?
right.
I mean, just by nature, it's hard to let go because, I don't know, we have just like, there's no face on those pillars.
Yeah.
They don't want to offend or over compliment somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
It's not abstract. It's done by on purpose because.
it's not an accident. Yeah, it's on purpose. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
I've got a question.
yeah.
Does the author of the book, or do you have any idea that when did animism begin, or when is that part of this whole discussion, and also ancestor worship?
Oh, yeah, that's actually, well, oh, yeah, actually, there's another slide. This one's about ancestor worship. I'm not actually going to get into that, but this is actually a skull, a real live human skull that was plastered and decorated. And so yeah, there's a lot on that. I'm not gonna get into that today. I did grab this this slide, but yeah, it's yeah. So there's a lot more in this book. I can't cover all of. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah. So the thing that I did want to mention though was this idea or the direction I want to go. And actually, I think there's a lot of fruitful ideas in this book, apart from just this little piece that I've been talking about. And so I think there's other material here that might be useful for the future. But the particular angle I wanted to take was that question about personification. They refer to this idea of a hyperactive agency detection device. Right? When you're in a creepy old house and you hear creak, who's there? Well, why is it who? It might just be the wind blowing a rusty shutter, or it could be a branch scratching on a window. I mean, but who's there? Well, why do we do that? Well, I think it comes down to this trade-off between a false alarm versus a misdetection, right? If you always assume, oh, it's probably nothing, and it turns out it's a lion, tiger, or bear, or evil human out to get you, then you die. Whereas if you err on the side of caution, it's like, who's there? Who's there? Oh, it's nothing. Well, false alarm, you wasted a little bit of, intellectual energy and time, investigating something that wasn't a threat. But somehow evolutionarily, we've played that game and we've come to a solution that kept us alive, which is to assume agency even when there might not be agency. That's our default move, to assume that there is agency. And then the other thing I already talked about was that theory of mind, of thinking about, I am thinking that you think this. My thoughts are not the same as your thoughts. Your thoughts are not the same as my thoughts. There are different repositories of ideas about those. So there's different worlds, right? It was a world full of different worlds. Everybody's got their own little image of the world. So that combination of this assuming agency and projecting this idea of mind into any complicated process naturally creates a certain kind of God. And that it looks to me pretty convincingly like that's the roots of our spirituality, is this kind of personified entities. They're not necessarily benevolent, right? I mean, the hurricane that comes crashing through, or the flood, or the volcano isn't necessarily benevolent. So maybe I'm hijacking this primal impulse, this spiritual impulse, and trying to yoke it to my particular purposes, which is to cultivate virtue, to make people good people. But maybe that isn't what it happened for. It's not why it happened or how it happened. That's something I'm trying to use it for, and that people have been trying to use it for a long time. But that fact, that's the fact that that's something we are doing. It's a choice we are making. Well, then maybe other people could make other choices. For me personally, I hate the book of Revelation. I just think it shouldn't be in the Bible. But the thing is, from this point of view, this idea of, these spectacular events happening and God's, running the universe like that, maybe that is really consistent with the history of human spirituality. And it's the part that I kind of have an aversion to, being a rationalist kind of person. But, but maybe it really is there, and I've got to somehow come to grips with that as really a part of what spirituality is, what religion has always been to some degree. Yeah. So, now the thing is, though, again, with sort of Frank's thought about, well, okay, you think this is true, or how strong is the evidence? Well, here's another thing about the transition. The fact that civilization preceded agriculture, that's a jolt. And so I just want to say some more about that. Okay, so for let's see, the man says, for nearly 2.5 million years, 90% of hominid existence, we've been hunter-gatherers, right? Around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, we inexplicably swapped our spears and plows and changed our spears for plows and changed from foragers to farmers. So instead of hunting animals, we started breeding them. So okay, well, I naively as a kid, I thought, oh, okay, well, yeah, because then if you don't have to go find an animal every time, you got one out in the yard, and when you need to eat, you kill the animal and now you eat. You don't have to run through the forest and find one every time. Same thing with food, right? We grow it. We don't have to go find it all the time. We just grow it. Great, Well, it turns out but it's a lot of work, right? You got to water the crops, you got to plow the fields, you got to weed the crops, all that stuff. So what was the reward for all this drudgery and self-denial? Surprisingly, it was less food, not more, the man says here. Farmers consumed fewer vitamins and minerals and substantially less protein. Hunters ate much broader range of animals and plants. If one got scarce, they focused on another. So, and human bodies were much better adapted for hunting than they were for plowing and clearing land. Early farmers had worse teeth, more broken bones, slipped discs, arthritis, and hernias. A lot of this stuff didn't exist in the fossil record until we became agricultural creatures. In ancient agricultural societies, 1/3 of children died under the age of 20. Skeletons from the first few thousand years of the Neolithic Revolution show human height dropped by 6 inches on average due to inadequate diet. One of the authors he quotes here says that early agriculture was history's biggest fraud. So, one thing that he talks about, and doing it kind of out of order because he does this right at the beginning of the book, but he talks about Adam and Eve as a folk memory of the time before agriculture, when they were simply, in the garden, they could eat whatever they wanted to eat, but then, after the fall, they would have to toil endlessly to, for their daily bread, right? And so that's, an interpretation of a lot of these really primal stories is that they have some seed of something, like the flood story. That's the one he talks about also. It's like so many cultures have a flood story, and the little remnant survives, well, there probably was a big flood, I mean, there probably is some historical basis for this, and the details get endlessly embellished. But so we're Adam and Eve, hunter-gatherers, it's a distinct possibility. I mean, he states it as a fact in the book. And but then there was this transition. Well, why the hell would we have made that transition? It was a really bad deal. I mean, why would you give up the freedom of being a hunter-gatherer? And in fact, in a world where there was plenty of food to be had, and do this other weird thing. Well, so most theories, the man says here, most theories regarding the rise of agriculture are paradoxical because they assume agriculture came first and led to permanent settlement. I personally had assumed that permanent settlement drove the need for ethical frameworks and all that stuff that we've been talking about. So I thought that religions, as we understand them, emerged to solve a problem of civilization. And yeah, it may have exploited some of these primal impulses and stuff like that, but it was invented. Religion, as we think of it, was invented in the service of civilization. I now think that's wrong. That's not what happened. The very early date of the Göbekli Tepe and other archaeological sites show that humans created settlements with booming populations, the man says. They made giant temples and great works of art, and then centuries later, they shifted from hunting and gathering to herding and cultivating crops. Wow. So building such great temples would have required a large workforce and a high concentration of people in one place. Well, it's one thing if we're all just wandering around and taking our little bit here and there, killing an animal and harvesting berries and whatever. But if you put everybody in one place, now you deplete the local ecosystem and the animals get the hell out because there's all these humans there. Let's get away from them. So now you need to have you got a supply chain problem, right? How are we going to supply? We've got this enterprise, which is of paramount importance. We are making this ritual site, and that is more important than anything. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm not sure how much this plays in the book or the narrative, but it seems to me you can't really talk about much of this at all unless you're trying to map it on the evolution of civilization.
Right.
So presumably, we were all living in just very small hunter-gatherer groupings and so forth. And over time, with the growth of humanity or what have you, or encountering other such small groupings and figuring out that, oh, gee, if we actually combine forces and group together, it's just not my family group, it's my little clan and someone else's little clan, that we're safer, our food sources are more secure, et cetera, et cetera. So as you kind of grow along that trajectory and you have larger and larger groupings, what's the cause and what is the effect of on these practices? Right.
And so I mean, you just said the chronology that I assumed was the case. We got together for safety, security, and food and things like that. And it's like, And this, what this says is, no, that getting together got us less food, It caused us to die.
That's
caused us
that-
younger.
although that's
So-
counterintuitive, it may still make sense in the sense that there were other benefits from being together other than more food.
Well, right, and what this suggests, I mean, and again, I didn't come into this wanting to believe this, but I mean, I think the story is pretty compelling, and obviously, I encourage you to read the book, you know, is that it looks like it's like, why did those little groups first come together? Well, between 14,000 and 12,000 years ago, they came together to make Göbekli Tepe. Oh, and the other thing, I don't know if I said it, there are no signs of permanent settlement around there. That's the other shocking thing. No signs of permanent settlement in that area. The nearest fresh water source is very far away. And so, well then, there are signs of permanent settlement in California. Yeah. But no, but there are no signs of permanent settlement at Göbekli Tepe. It's just this ritual site, apparently, that's off all by itself. And that's why it's like, well, how did that happen? There wasn't like it's not like there was a city here that built this temple. It's like the temple came first. And they must have been pulling from 100 miles away to get enough people to build this thing. So so the reason that they first came together, this suggests, was for ritual. It was to raise up these and carve these spectacular pedestals, these you know, idealized humans, these gods, was why they first came together, not for pragmatic things like, you know, the lions and tigers and bears, and because we'd already solved that problem for 100,000 years, you know. And so it looks like it wasn't for pragmatic reasons that we came together and started having larger and larger settlements. It looks like we were still hunter-gatherers as we were getting together here. But the thing that pulled us together, it looks like, was religion first.
So that's very interesting, because then we ask, well, why did we do this? You know, what need did it address? And then we wonder, is it possible that some religious impulse, maybe wanting feelings of awe that you got if you got into a big enclosed space with a lot of other people and you all chanted together or sang, and it aroused feelings, kind of a high or something, you know? Or it could be that sort of being in community with many people was a positive experience to have, even though it wasn't directly related to increased survival or something like that at that moment.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because it suggests, gee, maybe there's a spiritual needs that are as real as needs for food or shelter.
Yeah. And well, one thing, I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but you go to Europe and you see this spectacular cathedral, and then you think about the kind of hovels that people were living in, who built this place or who saved their pennies to help build, to support the building of this place. And you think, is that right? Is that, I mean, how could that, was that really a nasty thing for the evil church to do? It's like, there wasn't a church when this happened. When Göbekli Tepe happened, there was not some big power structure, you know, preserving its own power by exploiting, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses and all that stuff that I heard as a kid growing up. I mean, yeah, we all know religion can be abused in that kind of way, but I never thought that was what religion was about, you know. But you know, then there was always that question about, oh, well, wait, have we, you know, did we, at what point did we go horribly astray from what religion really should have been? When we started building these colossal cathedrals instead of tending to the needs of the poor, did we really depart from the intrinsic nature of religion? Maybe not, because in the birth of agriculture, everybody was suffering. They were had a materially less good life than they would have had if they just kept on being hunter-gatherers. But somehow this was important enough to them, or whatever, for whatever reason, they did it. And Oh, yeah.
Need to understand or explain why these practices or beliefs became important. And for me, it wouldn't be hard to believe, we're sentient beings, we're thinkers, we have brains, right? So we exist in this environment and we have questions about the phenomena that we experience in living in this environment. And over time, it's sort of, you could easily imagine, well, here's our explanation for the sun rising and setting. There's a God behind that action that we experience in the world. To your point, I think, Bill, you were talking about this sense of agency. Something has to be responsible for everything that happens or what we experience. So some practices and some spirituality evolves just around this. This is how we understand and explain our experience of living.
Right.
And those practices probably could go in many different directions, but share some commonality as well. Explaining physical phenomena, creating gods that can be worshipped and or will take action or what have you. But my point being that, so those things would evolve as a way for us to psychologically and or, intellectually deal with what we experience.
Yeah.
And now how does that then evolve into religion, some ritual practice, or as I would say, making offerings to the god or sacrificing animals or doing anything else that relates to having, evolved in that way?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, their model, what tools did they have? They got information coming at them. What tools did they have to encapsulate this information, to say, what is this thing that I'm experiencing? And if it's complicated, their default was, it's a person. It's God. And here are the person's behavioral characteristics. It does this. Oh, and when this happens, then it does that. And sometimes those connections are not quite that deterministic. So maybe the God is a little bit capricious, and you can't always be sure what this capricious individual is going to do on any given day. But we didn't have algebra and geometry and Monte Carlo simulations. We didn't have other ways of modeling the world. And so this was our go-to move 20,000 years ago. This is the way our brains worked. And so, of course, we built these kinds of models because those are the kinds of models we were capable of building. But the thing is, though, just knowing that the ancient nature of this, the fact that religion predates agriculture, these kinds of ritual, these temple building, which I think you'd have to say is a religion, right? Temple building predated agriculture. It really turns things upside down for me. And how, but also it kind of makes me think, well, again, I said before, what was the real true purpose of religion, and what is somebody has perverted it to do some other weird thing? Well, I may be sculpting it to try to make it do what I want it to do, and it may want to. It historically may have wanted to do a lot of other stuff too. That it's not inconsistent. Even the pieces of it that I want to attenuate, and other people, are a lot more comfortable with. It's not necessarily that they are being less true to the ancient spirit of religion. Now one can argue they're being less true to a particular teacher in the history of religion, but but there's, but there, but there's, it's, we've only been trying to make religion a rational process for a few hundred years, right? I mean, Thomas Jefferson had the Jefferson Bible, and he was going to, get rid of all the crazy, all the magic and miracle stories, and just take out, the ethical teachings of Jesus. That was the core. That was the real thing. Maybe religion is more than that, and maybe we're not always comfortable. Maybe people like Jefferson aren't always that comfortable with those other facets of what is really has always been a part of religion. So yeah, there's and so where I want to go. Oh, I guess we're getting close to. Oh, I guess we got a little more. Oh, no, that clock is meaningless. Where are we? Yeah, 9:30. Okay, 9:30. Yeah, okay. So we got a little more time. So maybe I'll begin to, well, first of all, I want to make sure people get a chance to talk about any thoughts they might have. So far, I'm going to take a slight shift.
So, Bill, when did the first astronomical observations enter into this kind of thing? I mean, you said they didn't have algebra and geometry, but many very, very early peoples made incredibly sophisticated observations of things like the solstice and stuff like that. I mean, we know this about Stonehenge, but probably not everybody knows that there were things like this in Southern California, where the people were definitely not practicing agriculture or living in cities and stuff like that, but there still are places in Southern California where, holes in rocks line up at the solstice and stuff like that. And clearly people had to have been making incredibly sophisticated observations to see these things. Right.
So there might not have been math, but there was geometry in that sense. Yeah. And yeah. So I think, so I think Stonehenge is about 6,000 years ago. But these things, that wasn't the first time it happened. Yeah. I don't know the date when the earliest evidence of that exists. But yeah, so that striving to understand the world, it goes way back to to before civilization. Yeah. So any other thoughts you want to share?
I just wanted to point out really quick. I think even in a hunter-gatherer like situation, it may have still been very important for the peoples to understand the timing of the world, because the population would change, the ecosystems would change, and you kind of need to keep up with that. So if you see when the solstice is, then you know that you have, until another solstice to do whatever it is you need to do. And so that could have been existent for hundreds of thousands of years and just naturally built into our evolution in a sense. So, no need for math, more of just an evolutionary mathematical problem.
Right. Had to be able to count at least, cycles of the moon or something like that. But yeah. And so it's just one of the threads that I want to pull out, and there's a lot of other material, as I said in this book. There's a lot of different ways you could go with it, and I mean, I'm up to 12,000 years ago. There's a lot that's happened in the last 12,000 years regarding the evolution of ideas about God, and he talks about a lot of very interesting threads in that history. Just a lot of neat stuff, but I won't digress to that right now. But the thing that I'm planning on moving toward for next week is this idea of personification, which is that's just the default move for people in that time. But now, because of the way our brains have evolved and our culture has evolved, we have some other models of the world. Right? I mean, we can make maps, and we can do math, and we can make models of the world. That's what I do for a living, is make computer simulations of little pieces of the world here. And so so I think it's to me a very interesting question. Like if someone says, do you believe in God? That to me is just choosing up teams, right? It's just, are you on my team or are you on the other team? You know, and so that to me is not a conversation starter. It's a conversation ender, or it's just a, are you with me or against me? But so the question I much prefer is, are there contexts? Because the other thing is some people will say, oh, well, if you don't believe in God, you think you're the most powerful thing in the universe. Like, that's really ridiculous. Have you ever heard of a supernova? Have you ever seen a star? That's obviously not true. So the idea that disbelief in God is an act of hubris, making yourself the most important thing in the world, that's obviously not true. Or it's not universally true. I'm not saying there aren't arrogant jerks who disbelieve in God. That could be true, but I mean, but that's not a defining characteristic of that belief system. So the thing is, I think to me, a more interesting question, a more thought-provoking question is, are there contexts in which it is useful to personify the ultimate forces in the universe? For me personally, gravity, not so much. But and so is it just gravity, electromagnetism, strong and weak nuclear forces, and that's it? Well, there's more to the universe than that. And how do we put all those pieces together? And I can't find a solution to the wave equation that tells me, the morally right decision to do in a given circumstance. I mean, there's just a lot of layers to all this stuff. So I think there is, I would argue, there is a place for personification. And what is that place? And is it every place? Do we have to say that a person, said the magic words and then there was light? Or is that not necessarily the best way to describe light? I've got another idea. Move to Mars. So the thing that I would like to start, I mean, because there's just kind of a lot of topics you could think about here, where what is a person, or what deserves to be treated as a person or thought of as a person, and what is less than a person or not a person. I think there's a lot of interesting threads to pull on there. There's the whole abortion discussion. There's the death penalty. There's artificial intelligence. There's just all kinds of things where this question of what ought we to personify and in other circumstances in which personifying things is not leading to the best understanding of the world or the best decision-making process. So that's some of the stuff that I want to play with next week. And so I don't want to monopolize all of the time. So but that's where I'm heading for next week. But any more thoughts people would like to share on what we've talked about so far, or folks online? Okay. Well, I wonder, should we draw things to a conclusion now? Does it sound good? Okay.
Bill,
Yeah.
that's Mary. I just have a question on this Göbekli Tepe place.
Yeah.
Was there any evidence of types of worship, or, like, I don't know, animal sacrifices or anything? Have they been able to figure anything out about that?
I think that, I think the evidence that he talks about is these pillars and the carvings and stuff like that. That's the stuff that survives for 14,000 years. So he did say there was no evidence of permanent settlements there, and that suggests there wasn't, a huge inventory of, oh yeah, here's the burial pit for all the detritus of the civilization. So it suggests there's not, it wasn't in the middle of a big settlement. And so that would reduce, the amount of, I guess that conclude that because of the relatively small amount of other stuff they're finding there. But yeah, I don't know, getting the Rosetta Stone for the glyphs that are on these pillars, that would be, the dream. But what are the chances of that? Or what are the chances that you can, how do you get that initial seed to start to decode that? Yeah, I don't know if that'll ever happen, but yeah, but his argument, and I mean, he does it much more completely than I can in the book. He explains, why the scholars in this area feel that, these are very clearly idealized humans, lofty persons, gods that are depicted here. Yeah, now exactly what their ritual practices were, we don't know, but we know it involved building really big structures that required at least hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people to put it together. They didn't have the wheel. They did not have the wheel. They were Stone Age people who were building this. Right. So it's, I mean, well, now they depict it here as having, using logs as rollers or something like that. Maybe, but yeah, so the idea that this was that important to people that long ago is really pretty remarkable. So yeah, okay. So if any announcements or discussion about anything else? Are we set to go our separate ways?
One thing, I don't know if people know this, Donna Thorpe let me know that Barbara Wells, who, as we all know, is a faithful attendant at ADG. She's, I think, in the hospital with COVID. Also, the Woodalls, you may know them. They've had some health issues, and I think Bill has been diagnosed with COVID. So COVID, and I'm home with COVID. So COVID is really pretty rampant right now. But I don't know if there's other things going on, but I thought we might want to close today with, sorry, with a prayer for the scourge.
Oh, and just one thought before you said, Bill Woodall was in the hospital. I understand he's home now, is what I've heard.
He's home now.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't hear you online. We can't hear you.
Well, just yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, Jim, yeah, use the mic because people won't hear you on the line.
I gave a presentation about 10 years ago here, a single presentation about Göbekli Tepe.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I thought it was very important and I wanted to follow through, but there wasn't enough interest. Yeah, so maybe that was my fault as the presenter. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad you're doing it.
This was the first time that I had heard about it in any detail, and
yeah, I understand.
Yeah, cool. All right. So Mary, would you like to conclude?
Or does anybody, if anybody else would like to lead us in prayer, I'm fine with that, but I'm happy to do it.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Heavenly Father, we ask that you would be with us in this time. We pray for those among our friends and family who are ill. We pray that this virus will, stop spreading and that people will get over it successfully. And we pray that Barbara is out of the hospital soon. And we just ask that you would be with us as we go out during this week. Thank you for the time to get together and to learn and pray and think about things that are different from our daily world. We thank you for all of the amazing things that are out there that you've created for us. And we ask that we would be a light of love and peace in this world. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.